Okay, unemployment. Again, how is one defined to be unemployed?
Not work.
Right, so to be unemployed, to not 1+ hours for pay. What else do you have to be not unemployed? Or to be unemployed, you must not work 15 hours for no pay. And what must you do? You must look for a job as well. In addition, what else do you have to not be in order to be unemployed? Right, you also have to be not any of those exceptions, right? So you can't, not in the military. You cannot be a full-time student. You cannot be disabled or institutionalized. Technically, you cannot be discouraged. Of course, remember what a discouraged worker is, right? A discouraged worker is somebody who said no to all three of these, right? Yeah, this not quote-unquote retired, whatever that means, right? Again, I know lots of people who are retired, but probably are still working, right? I mean, What is employed is saying yes to one of these two things, and again, all of these being not. All right? And remember that these people are what make up the civilian labor force. Right? That's the.
Handing my homework back. I
Wrote that down the wrong way?
Yeah, I'll get it.
Okay. All right, so the next part about unemployment is that we often try and categorize it when we calculate a number. So when we get all of these number of people who actually are on the unemployed list, the government will also try and put you into a category. There are 3 categories that the government defines for unemployment. Give yourself room to define and give examples of, all right? So the first one is frictional. And frictional unemployment is someone who has the capacity to do a job but is just between jobs. So the idea here is that frictional unemployment comes from contract work. Right? When a contractor gets hired, so some contractor gets hired to, say, put in all the windows in a housing development. So the contractor, that's going to take him like 6 months to put in all the windows, right? So when he finally starts his job, he's going to work for 6 straight months. Is he going to have another contract start immediately after those 6 months are done? He would be nice, but it would also be a little bit scary too, because you're contracted to work for 6 months to finish the windows. Could it potentially take an extra week or 2?
Yep.
Are you going to get paid for that extra week or 2 technically?
Nope.
No, they're going to pay you the contract job amount right up front, right? So usually contractors don't set up work right at the end of their contract job because they're buffering a little bit, right? They're being nervous, being careful. Hopefully they're being careful, all right? So you actually expect this kind of unemployment to exist. And contractors, when their job runs out, until they start up another one, they're filling out the forms, folks, right? Because if you don't get paid, I mean, what do? I mean, hopefully you've made enough money on that 6-month job that you could probably survive for a little while with nothing, but if the government's willing to give you a helping hand until your next contract job starts up, are you going to say no? You're going to go get the handout, okay? So this is considered okay unemployment. The government expects that there is going to be some of this happening. There's just no way that it's not going to happen, right? Simply because jobs don't always work exactly the way we think they're gonna. So it's
seasonal jobs.
Seasonal right inside of here, yep. contract work / seasonal, right? So if you only work during the summer and then you just sit around the rest of the time.
Or only work during the school year and sit around the rest of the time.
Whatever. So
like roofers
can't roof in the winter? Yeah. Amen. So what are they doing during the winter? You can.
It's better, it's better not to
What
during
about,
the winter on a roof.
School teachers.
They can't get unemployment in the summer.
Technically not. Although if you work at it, you could potentially work the system to make it happen.
Is it because it's salaried, so there's an intent for the whole year?
No, actually, I'm only paid for the 9 months of work that I do. I technically am not getting paid over the summer. I mean, I can stretch my salary out. I can say, instead of paying me my full paycheck every 2 weeks that I deserve, I can say, divvy it up to be 26 weeks. But theoretically, I'm only getting paid while I'm working. All right? I mean, I literally am unemployed over the summer. They're not paying me to sit around and do nothing. I mean, I can get checks, but it's me taking my salary that I'm being paid for 9 months and splitting it into 12. Exactly. So I would have to actually teach summer courses in order to technically get paid over the summer, right? And for some reason, we as teachers don't get to be able to file unemployment when we're stuck in that situation.
That frictional position.
No, I can't actually do it. They wouldn't let me. It seems unfair, right? I mean, if a contractor who only works 6 months and then gets 3 months off waiting for his next job to start, right? He gets unemployment. Why don't I?
I work as a school bus driver, but I get unemployment.
You collected over the summer? See? Damn it. I need to start filling out the forms.
My mom worked as a lunch lady
Mm-hmm.
at an elementary school. She got unemployment during the summer. She didn't work.
Well, I'm...
They got higher wage up.
I don't know. Beats me.
47 years. She worked some of her summer. Some she didn't.
My super high salary. Yeah, I mean, come on. I broke the Wisconsin budget, right? I mean, that's what Governor Walker told us.
So what is their reason that teachers can't? Just all those teachers?
Probably, yeah.
They don't like kids all
Honestly, I don't know. I haven't researched it. I don't want to, because otherwise I'll start filling out the forms. And I would feel slightly guilty doing it, right? Because, I mean,
Really?
I would. I don't think I should get paid for doing nothing.
Why? I do. He's not adding to GDP.
That's right. I would be anti-American if I were to do that. And I'm not a communist or a socialist. I'm a...
Does it save money?
Yeah, that's exactly right. When I buy something, it's only new, period. Although, don't look at my clothes, yeah. All right. So the next type of unemployment is structural unemployment. And this is when there is a mismatch between skills needed and skills available. So when a job needs you to have the ability to work smoothly on a computer, and you have not quite yet figured out how to be smooth on a computer, your unemployment may be considered structural because the job you did prior to the new jobs that are being developed didn't require a computer, right? So a lot of hospital work used to say, well, you get out your paperwork and you do charts and you pass it around. That's not how hospitals work very often anymore, right? You got to be able to slide into a computer and type in all of the stuff and click between screens and click check boxes and all the other right stuff and figure out how to type in the shortcuts that will send the notes in automatically, et cetera, et cetera. Right? And that, if you can't do it, then right, you're in trouble, right? So you may be one of the best nursing assistants that are out there, but if you can't figure out how to deal with computers, it could be a while before you are pulled back into the workforce, right? And this is the sort of thing that leads to structural unemployment. When GM laid off a person who had been working on the line for 30 years, guess how many skills that person on the line had for jobs that are currently available? Not many, right? I mean, if you've been sitting on the line, you know, connecting a very specific part to a car for 20 some odd years, I mean, yeah, you're really good at that one job, but if that job all of a sudden disappears because now a robot does it, I mean, right, those are the people that are coming back here and spending, this could be long term, right? This is considered bad unemployment because it's long term and potentially even permanent, right? I mean, it's just been so long since you've done anything new. It could take literally years to retrain your body to do something else, body/mind, right? When we have high structural unemployment, that's when the economy really starts to hurt, okay? And that's, if you think about the dot-com crash, when that happened, and that caused a great deal of difficulty in the economy. It took us a while to recover from it. Similarly with this 2009 crash, again, it was one of those things where some of the unemployment that came around was structural, right? And realize that some of these things are caused by outsourcing, right? I mean, the jobs where you do manual labor are often being sent somewhere else because it's cheaper somewhere else, right? And you want your companies to maximize profit, so if it's cheaper to do it somewhere else, your company should send it somewhere else, right? So just even technology can lead to this, right? Because the new technologies that are being developed, that are being used in the workforce, if you don't know how to use those yet, you could be in trouble, right? Of course, that's why you guys are all here. Make sure you don't have this happen to you. And then the last kind, cyclical. And this is unemployment from a recession.
From being ill or
No, this is from the economy being ill. So when the economy starts tanking, remember the circular flow model, right? When the flow is not flowing up, but it's instead flowing down, right? People are spending less money, so businesses are getting less money, so they're laying more people off so that households have less money, which means businesses will get less money, which means businesses will lay more people off. That type of unemployment, that's cyclical, right? I mean, it's just the nature of we human beings. At some stage, we say, okay, we're going to start saving. And then eventually, we stop. Don't ask me why. It just happens, right? We know it happens because you can watch it. It's been doing it for 70 some odd years, right? This is, yeah. It's not good, but it's also not all that bad, because once the economy turns around, once we start buying things again, once the flow starts moving again, if you're cyclically unemployed, you'll get hired back at your company, right? The idea here is that maybe you switched jobs right before a recession started, and generally what happens in a company? Last one in, first one out, the old LIFO method, right? But that doesn't mean that you don't have the skills to work, right? You're not structurally unemployed. You're just, and you call your old company and they're like, no, we're not hiring anybody. The economy sucks. And so you're like, well, crap, As soon as it turns around, though, yeah, you'll get your job back. You have the capacity to do work. It's just that for whatever reason, the demand is not there yet. Once it comes back, then you're good.
So what are you considered if you are ill or injured or something like that?
You mean like disabled?
Okay. No, you work. You have a job. It's just that
When you're sick?
No, you have a job. It's that you got cancer, or you got sick, or you had
Yeah, you start becoming disabled.
Whether you're short-term disability or long-term disability.
Right, essentially, yeah. Because a lot of times that's not actually unemployment, that's just disability unemployment, which is, again, that pulls you out of the numbers, theoretically. Right, so if you fill out disability paperwork and start collecting disability payments, you're removed from the unemployment numbers.
Is there a manner of graphing which one covers most of our unemployment?
Yes, you can look. Yes, you can look these sorts of things up. You can look, if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it'll say unemployment is 7.7%, and it'll say that 2.2% of it is here, 4.4% of it is here and 1.1% of it is here, right? I mean, it'll give you the numbers, or at least what the government thinks the numbers are. Yeah.
Okay. Commonly, which one is the leader?
Well,
Say in the last
Right
5
now?
to 10 years, since the recession.
right. Right now, it's this, right? We're just sort of waiting for demand to come back.
All the way back.
Yeah. Nope. We're not there yet. Normally, this is the highest one, right? When unemployment is sitting around 5%, this tends to be where most of it is. It's just people.
Common, makes sense.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's just that's.
Probably more so in this area because it's more seasonal.
Yeah.
It's more prevalent.
Since we have seasons. Whereas.
The South does.
Right. Yeah.
Wouldn't structural affect more the microeconomy? Because you're looking at industries, specific industries, not the whole economy, because
Well, I mean, it comes from specific industries. I will grant you that. But any unemployment affects the entire economy. Period. Right? Whether you're laid off because because your skills are no good, or you got laid off because the demand for your product is not there anymore, it doesn't matter. That's affecting the whole economy because you're not making money, you're not being productive, and therefore you're not going to the product market and buying things. And businesses are not getting your money to be able to hire more people, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So this one generally comes from the micro side, or it comes from a specific company, but
it affects the whole.
Yeah.
Of course, like all of them.
all right. So please know these 3 things. All right. Now, why do we care so much about unemployment?
Because so many of us are unemployed.
But why? But why? You're getting paid for not doing anything anyways, right? You get unemployment. So
Because everybody else is paying for it in taxes.
We don't know. Because money makes the world go around.
money makes the world go around. That's very true. So why do we care so much about it? Why does it, every 2 weeks or 1 month, we get a new report about what the unemployment numbers are, and there's a big hubbubaloo about it, right? Why?
Productivity makes things grow when people work. There's more money to be spent.
Measurement of how the economy is doing, right? So low unemployment, again, would lead to us looking like we're doing better. Again, then, so why don't we include the military people inside of our calculations?
Because they're not part of the calculation.
I know, but why? Why not?
Amen to that.
Hey, stop being unpatriotic.
I'm sorry. Government is smart, and they know everything.
Individuals are smart, groups tend not to be, right?
Yeah.
Put 10 really smart people together, and what do they start doing?
Math.
True. Could be.
Who's our top economist?
Ben Bernanke. Ben Bernanke. He heads the Fed. You'll learn about him in Chapter 18. Okay, so the last thing in Chapter 12 that we need to talk about is what's called the GDP gap. All right? And, you could have said, why is unemployment such a big deal? Because it's one of the 3 things that we're always trying to do in the macroeconomy, right? Economic growth, full employment, and stable prices. So you could have just said, it's the goal of the macroeconomy, period. That would have been a sufficient answer for that kind of a question. But that is a bit of a trick question, so.
How dare you, sir?
Yeah, I would never ask a trick question.
From last chapter.
All right, so the GDP gap. So the idea here is, imagine, if you will,
Don't go with the chart there.
consumer goods and capital goods. What I'm going to create here is the production possibilities curve for the United States of America. What kind of a curve am I going to draw? Bowed out. Why?
Because
What? But what makes the production possibilities curve bow out? The law of increasing opportunity cost, right? Never hurts to review the micro side of the world, right? Cross. The law of increasing opportunity cost. All right, so here, the idea here is that if we were producing as much as we could produce maybe $22 trillion, right? whether it's mostly capital goods or mostly consumer goods, whatever, let's not worry about it. But we could crank out $22 trillion worth of real GDP, right? Remember, whenever I say GDP, I always mean real. But since we are not using all of our capacity, where is our production really? Somewhere inside, right? Because when you're not utilizing all of your resources, you're inside the curve, right? Question 1 from the multiple or the short answers, right? So we're really somewhere in here. This is where we're really at, and this gap is right there. The lost GDP that the country could produce because certain portions of the government or certain portions of the country are not being utilized. Resources, right? We're not using all of our resources. What are our resources?
Land, labor, and capital.
Land, labor, and capital, right? So there's some labor that's not being utilized. We have some unemployment. There is some land that's not being utilized, right? Because we're letting it sit fallow, right? Or we're not drilling for oil underneath it or whatever. And there's certain capital that's not being productive because it's a GM plant that's closed and it's just sitting there waiting for someone else to use it, right? That's what's creating this GDP gap, and that's why technically we don't like unemployment, because it leads to lost GDP that we could have generated, which of course would have made our country even that much better, right? Because all we really care about is GDP.
So as this great company of a country that we are, we're not producing at our highest level possible.
That's right. And it's unfortunate.
So we're bankrupt.
Bankruptcy is a different beast entirely. But it just means that we're not producing to our full potential, right? It's the sort of thing that your mom would say when you were sitting around doing nothing. It's like, well, why don't you get to your full potential? Here's a rag, go wash the windows. You'd look at your mom and go, what? I'm not reaching my full potential because I'm not washing the windows? My mom actually used that on me once.
And then you became an economist, so you proved her wrong.
But there was a difference. I didn't get that look. I give her that look because your head would roll across the floor.
She didn't care. She just wanted the windows cleaned. All right, that's the end of Chapter 12, folks. Any questions on Chapter 12 about business cycles or unemployment?
Did we talk about why teenage unemployment rates were higher?
Why do you think they are?
Because they're not counted.
Well, some of them are, right? As long as you're older than 16, right?
Because there's more of them?
Because they're more full-time students.
Well, why wouldn't you hire a teenager?
They don't have the
They're not
experience.
They don't have any experience. They may be in school too much. Darn annoying teenagers, right? High quit rates, right? I mean, just
I just want to make
they're
sure.
punks.
That's the fastest place to always hire them because they got no benefits.
Oh, that is a nice thing, right? All right, so moving on to Chapter 13. All right, Chapter 13 is where we get into the last goal of the macroeconomy. What are the 3 goals again?
Full employment,
Full employment,
stable prices,
and economic growth. Okay, so we've done economic growth, which is what's happening to GDP, and we've done full employment, because now we know how to calculate unemployment. So the last thing we need to deal with are stable prices. And so Chapter 13 is where we talk about inflation, which is the measurement of prices, right? Inflation, by definition, is the rise in general prices on average for goods and services. And again, there's always a time factor inside of this as well. Inflation will be calculated from month to month, quarter to quarter, year to year, depending on whichever one you like best. So it's basically the rise on average. So please note that inflation is an average thing, okay? Now, we as consumers aren't necessarily average consumers, So when there is inflation in the economy, we as individual consumers may not necessarily notice, okay? Because this is an average over all of the goods and services that are out there, and you may only buy a subset of those, right? You may say only buy, ramen noodles, a 30-pound bag of rice, and, whatever fresh produce is in the day-old market bag, right? I mean, when you're making minimum wage or you're really suffering, sometimes you don't get to go out there and do the average purchase, right? You don't get to go out and buy nice apples or bananas or pears or whatever. And so you may not notice the general rise in inflation because you don't necessarily buy all of the average goods out there, right? So note, specific goods may have price going down, others may go up. So can you think of anything over the last, say, 10 years that's had its price actually drop? I mean, can you think of anything? Eggs? Are eggs cheaper now?
No, not anymore.
No. Okay, so I want to know something that's cheaper in 2013 than it was in 2003. Computers. Heck yeah, right? I mean, if you wanted to buy a smoking hot computer back in 2003, you're going to spend $2,000 on it. Nowadays, how much are you going to spend to buy an actual, like one of these silly things, right? Yeah. Oh yeah, TVs. If you want to buy a 32-inch TV back in 2003, you were spending $1,800. Now, $250.
DVDs.
Right. So there are a lot of things whose prices have gone down, but on average over the last 10 years, what have happened to prices? On average, they've been going up, okay? So please realize that some things are going down, some things are going up. It's just generally speaking, when you have inflation, there's more of them going up than there are going down, okay? All right, so what's the opposite of inflation? Deflation. This is when prices fall. So it's the same as inflation, except instead of saying rise, say the fall, right? Now, bear in mind that there's a slightly different term that you may start hearing. This wasn't a common term, but I've heard it a couple of times in the last 2 or 3 years. So normally I don't talk about it, but I will here just because I've heard it. So if you hear this term, disinflation, right? This does not mean deflation. These two things are not the same, all right? So disinflation is when inflation is still positive, so we still have some inflation, but the key here is that it's falling. Yeah, So if inflation was 2% last year and it's 1% this year, you would say that we had disinflation this year. Right, so prices are still going up by 1%, but last year they were 2% and 1 is less than 2.
Inflation is decreasing slightly.
Yes, inflation is decreasing, but not decreasing so far that it becomes deflation, right? Right, so just realize if you hear this, that's what they're talking about.
Small measure roll.
Yep. All right.
But we're not really going to, that's not what you planned or anything.
You would.
You didn't really talk about that, so.
It's in the book, so you should probably know it. It's a good term. Normally I don't ask about it, but quizzes change from semester to semester. All right, so how do we measure this? That's right. How do we measure inflation? We use what's known as the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. You almost always hear it called CPI, so you want to get in the habit of understanding what that string of 3 letters normally means. Doesn't mean copy, paste, indent. It means consumer price index. String 3 letters, 3 words together. All right. So, the consumer price index, all right? So, this is calculated by finding the value of, and here's another great economics phrase, a market basket of goods. Yes, exactly. What? But that's literally how they do it, okay? Now, there's a comma after if, not a period. Sorry, there's a little bit more. The value of a market basket of goods compared to a market basket of goods in a base year. So the idea here is that when you go to calculate what CPI is, you have to have something to compare it to, right? You don't just add up all the numbers and say CPI is $855 per month, because that doesn't mean anything, right? Instead, what you want to do is to say, take however much this market basket of goods is, however much it cost, and compare it to something else. And as long as you always compare all of your numbers to the same base, you will normalize and get a proper inflation number, all right? So the base year, folks, base year is just a year we use to normalize. That's all it is.
Is there a specific year?
Right now, the year is 1982. For whatever reason, they are still based off of 1982.
Things were great in 1982.
Yeah, apparently. You can find CPI that's based off of other years. Again, it doesn't matter too terribly much what base year you use, because we don't ever actually, I mean, does anybody ever actually know what CPI number, the number is? I mean, have you ever heard what the number is? No. I mean, the number you hear is what was the inflation rate. It's just that that inflation rate is based off of this, which we'll get to here in a little bit. So, the way we calculate CPI, first off, we have to figure out what the hell is a market basket of goods. Right? Some of it is food. This is the average amount of each good purchased by, quote unquote, us in a year. So if on average a person buys, 8.2 apples, they will put exactly 8.2 apples in the basket per year. If the average person buys 16.3 bananas, they will put 16.3 bananas in the basket. If the average person buys 0.2 Chevys, they will put in here 0.2 Chevys. Right? If the average, Well, because normally you only buy a new car every 5 years, right? So that means that you're only going to buy in 1 year, you're only going to buy a fifth of that car, right? And that's what 0.2 is.
Most people really buy new cars?
No, that was just me making up bullshit. I mean, come on, isn't that what you're supposed to do according to the, right? Yeah, every 5 years you buy a new car. New car only, right?
I'm only 26.
All of you are proper Americans, right? So you only buy new cars, right? You socialists. Shame on you. All right, so basically it says, what's the average amount of goods that people bought last year? All right? And then you just add up all the dollar amounts for all of those items, right? And again, you do it in each region, right? Because you're going to say, what was the inflation rate, say, in the Wisconsin area? What was the inflation rate in the Chicago area? What was the inflation rate in New York? And then if you do it for the whole country, you just sort of average them all together, right? It's just a big, huge statistical analysis, which is great fun.
So if they do each year, why don't they use the base year as the previous year?
Because they want to be able to compare this year, and they could if they want, but then they would have to recalculate all of the numbers for every year that they've ever made numbers every year. And they want to minimize the number of times they do that.
If you're in a recession for 3 or 4 years, then you're not getting an accurate average of what normal is.
Oh no, you're still getting an accurate average even in a recession. There's no problem.
You think you still are?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, it's just now it's reflecting the fact that there is a recession going on. It's okay.
But if you're looking at a time that there's not a recession, how can you balance that against a base? If your base is a recession.
All you're doing is dividing by what the base value was, and you're doing that for every year. So if you wanted to, yeah, you just use the same year for everyone. So if your base year is 1982, to figure out what CPI was back in 1950, you're going to take the market basket of goods in 1950 and divide by whatever the market basket of goods is in 1982.
So it's not just to see how much is going up and down each year,
Nope.
just to say how it was as opposed to 10 years ago.
Yeah, or to compared to a specific year. That's it. The base year is just a way to use a comparison and have that comparison be consistent. As long as you're consistent, your base year doesn't matter. Whether you use 1982, 2002, 2012, 1915.
But everybody has to use it every time.
Exactly. Each year needs to use the same base year so that you're all converting to basically the same dollar amount. Right? So if you're dividing by the $1982, you're saying if I compare my $1950 and divide by 1982, I'm taking my $1950 and converting them into $1982. That's what a base is to say everybody come here and then compare, like it's 1982. So if we switched it to 2012, we would have to say, okay, take 1930, which used to be compared to 1982. We're going to say, okay, divide by 2012 instead, and do that from 1913 all the way up to 2013.
So we don't care what it was compared to last year.
No, we don't. I mean, we do, but we'll get to that in a little bit, right? When it comes to calculating CPI, it's driven off of one base year's market basket of goods. That's it.
Okay, so in 1982, what did they compare to? What was the base year then?
It's itself. So it divides by itself.
Because they just came up with that method?
Oh, no, they've been using this method since 1913. But the idea back then was that they actually did change it every year, but that was because they only had to change a couple of numbers. No, it was just, this is just a base calculator. That's it.
Okay,
Right?
so in 1981, you follow me,
Mm-hmm.
what was the base year they went off of?
Back in 1981? I don't know. I'd have to go look it up.
Maybe it was
I mean, do they go back?
Could have been.
Is it common that they go back to 15 years or 20 years, if there's a 20-year difference? Or
Usually after about 20 or 30 years, they'll move it up to the next, move it up a decade.
Okay, that's
So sometime soon, we will change from being 1982 based to being, say, 1992 based. Or they may jump it all the way up to 2002. Again, it doesn't make a difference. It's just where are you going to drop all of your numbers comparison-wise. You need them to be all in the same year so that you can actually compare them.
right.
Yeah, so if you just compare the dollars from 1913 to the dollars in 2013, there's a big, huge difference, right? In 1913, our prices were very, very low. In 2013, they're really high. So you need to move them all to some base year, whatever it is, and compare.
Okay, I was trying to think of an example of something that didn't exist in 1982, like essentially cell phones or something.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
That just starts when it starts.
Right. Yeah, yeah. So this market basket of goods, it is a little bit deceiving because if you... Okay, however it works. But the idea is that the market basket of goods is not comparing apples to apples all the time, all right? Because obviously when we're looking at 1982, there was no such thing as a cell phone, right? Really, you weren't buying computers even back then, right?
Comparing
But it's just a matter of setting a base.
Okay.
And this is saying,
Just basic items.
yep.
Okay.
But it does include, I mean, everything that people bought, right? So, I mean, so you know, back in 1992, they were factoring in VHS and beta tapes and, you know, 8 tracks. I mean,
Cassettes and
you don't remember the stuff you used to buy? Yeah. So, but again, so it's not necessarily a direct comparison. So it used to be that when we calculated CPI, we tried to compare straight apples to straight apples. But the problem with it is that we kept making too many new products. And so that's why we started saying, you know, don't pick the 20 best products, just pick the average basket. All right, so CPI in, say, suppose we wanted to calculate in 2012. All you would do is to say, okay, take your market basket dollar amount, however much it was for what the average person spent on stuff in 2012, and then grab the market basket in whatever your base year is. So if you're using 1982, you use your market basket in 1982. If you're using 1992, you would just use 1992. And you would do this for every year, right? So if you wanted to figure out what CPI in 2011 was, you use the same formula, except instead of using 2012, you do 2011 up here, but divide by the same base year, right? So market basket in 2011 divided by the market basket in your base year. So this is why you were trying to be consistent. And this, technically it's a percentage, so we always multiply by 100 to get it into a percent. So if you wanted to figure out CPI in 2010, same thing. 2009, same thing. 2008, same thing. 2000, blah, blah, blah. And the key here is that CPI in the base year is always exactly 100. Always, all right? So basically you're saying my starting point, my base year, is 100 points of CPI, right? Because if you take something and divide by itself, what do you get? 1, and then when you multiply 1 by 100, what do you get? 100, all right?
I think I remember that from business.
Yeah, it's probably similar. Okay, so that's how we calculate CPI. CPI over the last, again, depending on what you consider your base year, right? If your base year is 1982, CPI is sitting at around 210 or something like that. If your base year is 1992, CPI is not 200, it's probably closer to 150. Again, it's just because this base year's value may be higher or lower depending on what you use, all right? Anyways.
210% higher.
Then yeah, so it's basically 210% higher than 1982. That's what they're saying, basically.
Which shows inflation.
So the calculation for inflation then, which is what we really care about, right? What we really care about is inflation. So this is where you start comparing CPIs, right? Basically, all you're going to calculate is the percentage change in CPI from 2011 to 2012. So take CPI in 2012, subtract the CPI from 2011, and then divide by that 2011, and that will give you the percent change in CPI from 2011 to 2012. So it's the percent change in CPI from this year, or from last year to this year, sorry. From last year to this year. That's always how you calculate inflation. It's the percentage change in CPI from year to year. So, if I said, compute what the inflation rate is in 2012 for this example.
3.1.
Hey, quit cheating. It's pretty close, too. So again, find inflation in 2012. Right. 4, because what's 108 minus 104?
Right, 4.
4, right? So our inflation is equal to 4 over 104. 2.6. Well, it's 0.026, right? Don't forget to multiply by 100 when you're done to get it into an actual percentage. All right?
Yeah.
3.8?
Right? 3.46.
No. 4 goes into 10 twice.
This is 104, though. 3.8, is that what you guys got? Rounded to the nearest tenth? That's perfectly fine. So, not too far from 3.1%. Obviously, these numbers, I just pulled these numbers out of thin air. This is not the real inflation rate for last year. That's a little high. Inflation last year was like 1.1% tops.
Well, I wrote example in front of my notes on that.
Yes, yeah. It's made up example. Right? So it's just a formula, right? And that's all you have to do to crank it out. So, okay, so have prices always been rising? Have we always had inflation? No. When have we not had inflation? When have we had deflation? Name the years.
When we had recession.
When we had recessions. Usually the recessions have to be really bad for you to have true deflation. So the 30s was prior to 2009, the last time we'd ever had any deflation was back in the Great Depression. It was actually the late 30s. 2009 is the first time we've had deflation, an actual decrease in average prices since the 30s, which just points out how bad the quote-unquote Great Recession really was. Right? And again, remember, factors, right? The growth in the economy and unemployment, they're always fighting against stable prices. So when the economy is tanking, your prices are really stabilizing. And if they stabilize so much that they fall, it's actually considered bad. Okay? Most economists agree that deflation is a bad thing, right? You guys as consumers may like it, but economists are like, oh crap, right? If businesses have to lower prices in order to sell things, that means they're not making profit. When businesses don't make profit, ooh, all economists shiver just a little bit. Because unfortunately, the biggest movers and shakers in the economy are not us. It's really the businesses. Right? I mean, it's sad but true. All right, so.
We feed the economy, but they...
Right, they flow. All right, so let's see. Suppose I made $50,000 in 2011. And CPI was 105. And let's suppose that in 2012, the governor decided that I had done good work, and so he gave me a pay raise. I got a raise to $52,000 in 2012, and CPI was 110. So my question to you is, given this example, did I really get a pay raise? Maybe, maybe not. Let's figure it out. So how do we convert salaries from one year to the next? All right? Converting salaries. Converting salaries. So the way you do it is that you can go either direction if you want. You can either convert your 2012 salary to $2011, or you can go the opposite way and convert $2011 to $2012. Either way. Basically, you need to normalize the two numbers. Okay? But the way you convert, right? Salary in 2012 using $2011, right? It seems a little weird, but bear with me, right? So the way you calculate that is you take your $50,000 salary you had in 2011, and you're going to multiply by the CPI in the earlier year, or the next year, CPI in 2012 over CPI in 2011. And remember that our salary here is in 2011. This will convert my $2011 into $2012. So, take $50,000, multiply by, what was it in 2012? 110, and then divide by 105. So 50,000 times 110 divided by 105. Somebody with a calculator on it?
Oh, come on, mathematician.
This is arithmetic, not math. So back in 2011, or in 2011, my $50,000 is really the same as $52,380 in 2012. So how much of a pay raise did I get? I got a pay cut, right? I lost money. I got $2,000 in extra pay, but how much did prices go up? Prices went up $2,380. My salary went up $2,000. Who got screwed? Right? So be careful with pay raises. You may think you're getting a pay raise, but if prices went up more than your pay raise did, yeah.
So does CPI essentially reflect cost of living?
Essentially, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this is why when you get a cost of living increase, like some businesses do that,
Right.
people are like, oh my God, I got more money. And my husband's always like, it means it's something.
Yeah, that means we stayed the same.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So if your governor tells you that your salary can never increase more than the cost of living, basically that's them telling you you will never get a pay raise ever again in your entire life, which is a really good incentive to work harder, right?
Yeah. What motivation that is, huh?
Yes. Go team. That's exactly right. So it's a good thing to know what CPI is so that you can calculate the inflation rate and say, well, if inflation was 2% and you gave me a 1% pay raise, I just basically took a 1% pay cut. Thanks. Right? I mean, when you don't get a raise, your salary falls by whatever inflation was that year, period. Right? That's how it works. This is why inflation sucks. Again, though, it's not, I mean, you may not necessarily see the decrease in your standard of living because of this, because if the prices of things that are going up are things you don't buy anyways, right? If the prices of yachts and mansions are going up by huge numbers, that could affect the inflation rate. But are you guys going to buy a yacht or a mansion anytime soon?
If they give me a better pay raise.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe in the next lifetime.
We each have $381 less to throw back into the economy. You know, multiply that by how many millions of people.
Uh-huh.
Money not being thrown back into the economy.
That's right. Mm-hmm. So inflation.
You tighten your belt.
That's right. Inflation hurts the economy, right? And that's actually a great lead into chapter 14, but we don't want to get there quite yet. All right, now.
Little segue there that you can't use.
Oh, I think I wanted to do it. Okay. Anyways, so inflation hits other things than just CPI, or comes things than just our salaries, right? So our salary, again, the idea here is that your nominal income is how much you get paid. Real income, is how much you make after inflation is factored.
So, that's your net and your gross?
It's like that, but it's not quite the same. I mean, net and gross, there's actual things that are taken out. Whereas here, it's more along the lines of you just can't buy as much, right? So it used to be that your nominal income could buy, 16 bananas and 8.2 apples and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But next year, it's only going to be 15 bananas and 7.3 apples and et cetera along the lines. And unless your salary increases enough to make up for that, you lose. All right? So this also has to deal with interest rates. So if you have $1,000 and you put it in the bank and it earns 5% interest, you leave it in there for a year. $1,000 at 5% interest for a year, how much interest do you make? 5% of 1,000, what's 5% of 1,000? $50. So you'd make $50. If inflation went up by 10% in that same year, what happened to prices? They went up 10%. So how much less does your money buy after the year is done? Yeah, you actually lost money by saving it.
You're in the red.
You're in the red, yeah, because prices went up more than the amount of money you earned in interest. So at that stage, what should you do with your money instead of putting it in the bank?
Spend all of it.
Essentially, you should spend it. But what you should spend it on is something that's going to increase in value the same as inflation. What sorts of things increase in value the same as inflation does?
Silver and gold.
Silver, gold, potentially guns if you're lucky. Usually people will say housing, real estate, right? That used to be a good investment. It's questionable nowadays. Although if you look at the housing industry, oh yeah, it's coming back, right? It's already started to see its increases go back to the way it was back in the 70s, 80s. Maybe not the 2000 range, but
Just sold 3 houses on a road this week.
they're going, right? I mean, it's pretty interesting. Now, so the idea here is that the real interest rate, yeah, so they didn't really help the economy. All right. So if you want to figure out what the real interest rate, the real amount of money that you're earning on your investments, you take the nominal interest rate, which is whatever the bank is paying you, right? So 5%, what have you, and you actually subtract inflation. That's the real interest rate. So if inflation is 10% and the interest rate is 5%, you're actually losing 5% of your money by investing it in that account. It seems weird because you're coming out with more money. It's just that your more money just can't buy as much stuff. So what good is putting it into a savings account if the money that comes out has less buying power? Yeah. So we can have negative interest rates.
See, most banks have that. Like, the bank benefit with it. How can I find out if I'm making anything on interest rates?
Oh, you're almost a guarantee that you're not right now. We've had negative interest rates for the last couple of years practically here. As long as interest is more than, say, 1%, I mean, if you're leaving your money in a regular savings account, your regular savings accounts nowadays earn somewhere between 0.75% and 0.1%. And inflation is like 1%. So you're actually losing money by leaving it in your bank account. Now, if you can find a certificate of deposit, a CD, you can invest for an entire year and probably earn about 2%. A CD, a certificate of deposit? You've never had one of those yet, Matt? No. Must be nice to be young. True. But normally when you invest, you are going to have a real interest rate that's positive. And in fact, most banks want interest rates to be positive. Why? Well, because they actually lose money if the interest rates are negative. Banks want there to be positive interest rates because it works the same way when you're loaning money out, right? If the inflation rate is 10% and you're only loaning your money out at 6 or 7%, the bank is actually losing money in the process. And banks, they don't lose money, folks. They have too much power to lose money. So if interest rates at a bank are not high enough such that there's a positive interest rate, guess what the bank will do? It will raise the interest rates, period. Okay? We'll get to that.
So can they raise the interest rate on you after you sign something?
Not if you've purchased a fixed rate loan. But if you have a variable interest rate loan, yeah, they'll jack it up on you, definitely.
Do they offer fixed rate?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Usually those are higher, though, right? I mean, if you go to get a fixed rate mortgage for your house, you're going to pay like 3, 4, 5%. Right? But again, that's to guarantee that over the life of your loan, your real interest rate is always going to be positive, right? Because that's when the bank will continue to theoretically be making money off of that loan to you. All right? Banks are not stupid. They're going to make sure that they're earning profit.
Is a fixed rate loan a better type of loan, or it's not really a better one?
Depends on how you call better, right? I mean, if you want to gamble, you can take a variable rate interest loan, because if you fix your interest rate at, say, 8%, and interest rates fall, yeah, you're screwed. You're stuck in the 8%, etc. Right? So it's good and bad. All right, so you can have negative interest rates, but again, it doesn't happen very often. Now, so we know what inflation is. We know how to calculate it now. We know how to, deal with base years. We can tell the difference between real and nominal. But we still don't know why. I mean, why do prices go up? I mean, it would.
People sick, so there's a shortage.
Because there's a shortage. Well, there's a good. Now, what causes shortages?
We're not
An
spending
increase in the supply of
Too much crap.
A decrease in supply. Okay, let's go with that one. All right. What would make every company in the country decrease their supply?
No buyers.
No. That's not quite the right way. That's more the demand side of it, right? We're worried. Higher prices on resources, right? So in other words, if gasoline prices go up, why does every company out there reduce their supply? Because now it costs them more to ship all of their goods, right? So similarly, why does the value of land make prices go up? If the value of land goes up, companies have to raise their prices because that means they're going to have to pay more property taxes, right? So another one that can hit is corporate tax rates, right? If the U.S. decides to charge companies more, right, that means they're going to supply less. Right? So decrease in supply, and this can come from a number of different reasons, right? Resource costs increase. Or corporate taxes rise. Right? Those sorts of things that force basically every company to reduce their supply. Right? The name that we give this is often called cost push inflation. Right? So it's where The cost of producing goods is what's pushing prices up. When businesses have to spend more to make their goods or ship their goods or sell their goods, they're going to have to raise prices, and that will cause inflation. Now, that's one side of the coin. What's the other way that prices go up? Well, we'll get to hyperinflation.
Demand?
Well, if we did supply on one side, what's the other one, right? What has to happen to demand for prices to go up? We have to have an increase in demand, right? An increase in demand is the other way that think, the regular old micro side of the world. If supply decreases or demand increases, price is going to go up, right? Well, when does demand for goods increase in the country? When are we going to buy everything, regardless of what it is?
When we worry that thing's going to be gone. Imminent storms or
Well,
When sellers are unable
technology,
to supply all
prices are low.
this, that,
well, not technology is all the supply side, but when do we spend more money?
when prices are low.
when sellers are unable to supply.
Well, that's the supply side, right?
Every other way.
That technology is still supply. Remember the non-price determinants of supply and demand.
Close to full.
Expansion, right? When do you guys spend money? Do you spend money when you have more money, right? So in this case, the increase in demand, this is when demand pull the inflation up, right? So it's us having too much money. So when the economy is cranking, when we all have a job and we're getting 13 and 15% pay raises, right? Again, think, early 2000s for those of you that worked back then, right? When we have lots of money, we're going to start spending it. We're going to go to the store and say, we need another 2-liter bottle of Pepsi. And if all the 2-liter bottles of Pepsi disappear inside of the store, what's the store going to do the next time they put out a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi?
raise the price a little bit.
They're going to raise the price a little bit, right? It's not going to be, yeah.
Buy 'em.
Yeah, they're in demand, so keep jacking the price up just a little bit, right? So that's what's going on when we have demand pull inflation. The catchphrase that we have for this is too much money chasing too few goods. But there are two ways that you get inflation. It either comes from the seller side of it, right, where it's costing them more or something in some fashion, or it comes from the buyer side of us, and it's just us buying too much, right? Again, this is, for the last 3 years, we haven't seen any of this, folks, right? I mean, we have not been buying too much, period, which is exactly why inflation has been so low for the past 3 years, right? I mean, have we been cranking out purchases? No, not at all right? But have prices been going up for sellers? A little bit here and there, right? Because gas prices keep going up a little bit. Electricity costs keep going up a little bit, right? Those are the sorts of things that everybody has to pay. All businesses have to pay it. If businesses' costs are going up, right, they have to keep paying more for health insurance for all of their employees, right? Again, this is exactly why they don't want to hire more employees, because they know that their costs are going to rise if they keep you around, because they got to pay for your health, and that's just an expensive endeavor, all right? So that's what's leading to these price increases, the small ones that we are seeing.
Now hyperinflation.
Yes, now hyperinflation. That's our last topic in Chapter 13. So, can inflation get out of hand? It has not happened in this country yet, folks, which is nice, right? But yes, it can, and that's when we have something known as hyperinflation.
Germany after the war.
That's exactly right. Where inflation is more than 100%. So prices literally double every year. So a more recent example, right? This actually happened in Germany right after the World War II ended, right? The reason it happened in World War II is that back then there were not a whole lot of goods in Germany. So whenever any goods were available on the stores, what did all the people do? They rushed in and bought it as fast as they could, right? Well, if everybody's buying everything as soon as it gets put on the shelves, what's the store going to do as soon as it gets more supplies and puts them on the shelves? Jacks the price way up, right? Well, now all the people who are standing around waiting to buy all these goods, they're going to go into the store and they're going to say, crap, I don't have enough money to buy as much as I did last time, but I still need to buy the goods right now because I'm scared, right? So they still spend every penny that they have. Maybe they don't buy as much, but they still spend every penny that they have. And the places where they're working, they're seeing their employees. The employees are saying, you know, by the way, if you don't give me a pay raise this week, I'm going to starve. Because they didn't have enough money to buy food for the week. So what did the company that was hiring them to work do? Gives them enough money so that they can go out and buy all the food that they need for next week. So they'll give them say a 5 or 6% raise for the next week. So when they get that 5 or 6% raise, what do they do when they go to the store? Spend it all. And what happens with prices? They'll go up 5 or 6% in a week. And then the workers will go back to the place where they were working and say, prices are going to go up 5 or 6% again. I need another 5 or 6% raise. So what does the business do? Well, it doesn't want their people to starve, right? So it says, okay, here's 5 or 6% more. So they go back to the store and same thing. Rinse, repeat. So every 2 weeks you get a 5 to 6% price increase.
And the value of the currency
Plummets.
and was nothing.
What stops that? Nothing. Yeah, or people, enough people die. Death is a good thing to cure hyperinflation. It's a little bit on the morbid side, but it works. The way it's been stopped in the current day and age, back in the 50s, there was literally nothing they could do. Germany almost, that's why we had another war. It's why that was actually after World War I. It's why World War II started, because they had to have something to stop the hyperinflation from growing, and it was another war. It was someone starting a new army. But the most recent example is actually 2001 in Argentina. And what happened was that the world came in and made it stop. What the world did, and the world in this case is the International Monetary Fund, they stepped in and said, we're going to convert all of the Argentine money, every penny of it, or peso, or whatever Argentine money is in, I don't remember right now. They converted it into euros. And then they closed every store for 3 days. Literally. You couldn't buy anything for 3 days. Because they would only sell stuff in those 3 days in the foreign currency they had just purchased everything of. So there was no money out there. And all the businesses are like, wait, I've got 6,000 euros, but I don't have any of my own money, so I can't buy anything. And so what happened is that literally inflation had to stop for 3 days, 3 full days of no inflation. When they started the economy up again, they said, okay, we'll sell you back all of your money, but we're going to take all of your money and lop off all of the zeros on it. Because their money had, when your value of your currency plummets, the government reprints it every couple of years with more zeros at the end. So their smallest denomination they had was like a $10,000 bill. That was the smallest thing you could get paid in. It's weird.
It's ugly.
Yeah, it was really weird, right? So what they did is they cut 4 zeros off of all their money, converted it back, and told everybody, chill out. And it actually worked. Argentina's inflation went down from 148% to 12% the next month. And all it took was basically convincing people, you don't have to freak out. You don't have to go to the store and spend every penny that you earned on the goods that you need. Wait.
Why did they go after the store owners?
Because they couldn't convince the people that it would be doable. And because most of the store owners were purchased by the government anyways. It's a little bit of a socialist economy down there, so it was a little bit easier to go at the business than to go at the people. Homework.
What a nasty word.
Oh no, that's a great word.
Can we expect the next quiz to be like the one we had today?
Yeah. I mean, they've all been like that, haven't they? Yeah, that was the end of chapter 13.
Dang.
Science.
Chapter 13 is relatively small. So please do Numbers 4, 6, and 10 in chapter 13.
And also the 12 that you said.
And the 12, obviously. If you got, just in case you forgot, chapter 12, 4 and 10, right? So if you haven't finished chapter 12, please finish that with chapter 13. If you have chapter 12 done, you're more than welcome to turn it in. I can hang on to it until later when I try to grade it.